Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Trail Talk. I'm so glad you could join us today. I know it was a little bit weird not having any Trail Talks last week, and then we didn't have one yesterday. We're doing it today and tomorrow, but you know what? We are here. So I'd like to introduce you to our very special guest today. This is John J. Dwyer, and he is Mr. Dwyer. I call you John or Mr. Dwyer?
Yeah, John's great. Yeah.
Okay. John is a celebrated author.
That sounds good.
Yeah, right. He's been a professor. He has a podcast, radio, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Just a man of many talents, and I really got sucked into these books. I am not going to lie; they were something. So this is, I don't know. Would you say this volume 1 is possibly your, biggest seller, or the book that you're most recognized for writing? Would that be?
Yes, Edie, I'm kind of, how would you put it? I've got two crazy traits. I write fiction and nonfiction. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a double blessing or a double curse, but, and the only reason I say that is the historical novels I write, people that really follow those, they're probably more familiar with like Stonewall or Shortgrass or Mustang, one of those. But in recent years, there has been
right here.
shameless commercial promotion there. Yeah.
No shame on this one.
Well, we can talk more about those in a minute because there's a big Duncan connection all the way through those. They're both based in Duncan, but as I grew up in Duncan, I think you probably tell folks that class of 74, and I think some of my English and journalism teachers, newspaper editors when I worked at the Banner and went to Duncan Junior High and high school are probably, I don't know if any of them are still around, but hopefully they're pleasantly surprised at how Dwyer turned out.
Your acknowledgments in the second book, is that where you listed all the teachers?
Yeah, the dedication there right at the beginning, Edie.
Okay, the dedication. I knew it was in here somewhere. I thought that was fantastic. Oh, right here we go. Tommy Ellis, sports editor of the Duncan Banner. Al Ruby, publisher of the Duncan Banner. Bernice McBride, Duncan Junior High English teacher. I love it. Junior High English teacher. Ruth Osherwitz, a Duncan High School journalism teacher, and Peggy Price, Duncan High School English teacher. I loved it that you recognized all of those people in this book. That was so fantastic.
Well, yes. And, I had a lot of time to think about who I was going to dedicate it to, because, it took a long time to get both these books done. And to your original question, Edie, as far as what I'm best known for, certainly in recent years, the demand has been such for these history books that I kind of had to leave my fiction writing career a little bit off to the side. We had projects in the works and so forth, but these Oklahomans books, Edie, they've struck a chord, and there's been such a response beyond like when you're writing historical novels. I mean, obviously readers and so forth, but with these books, schools, teachers, students, homeschoolers, the bookstores, and just general interest in Oklahoma. There's an energy because it's somewhat focused, and we haven't tried to, be the best-selling book in Rhode Island or anything with these. We have focused where we know the region that has an interest that it's about, but because it is a focused area that's only a portion of the country. It's kind of heightened, I think, the anticipation before the books got here, and then the excitement when they did get here. And this new one especially, yes, I'm known now for having written the first one, but everybody's been waiting on the second one. And since so many people that you and I know are in the new book, referenced in the new book, events that we've known about, remember, lived through, sometimes participated in, I have never seen, I will just tell you this, I've written 9 books and 2 study guides. And I would say that the anticipation and interest of this particular book probably exceeds all the other ones I've done combined. And I think part of that's because of the personal connection that so many people in our state have. Dr. Blackburn, the longtime Oklahoma Historical Society executive director, he made a quote. He said, every generation of Oklahomans needs their own telling of our history. He said, this is ours. And I thought that was, in his typical eloquent fashion, he caught hold of, I'm just the messenger. I'm not the person that did all the history, created it, or even was there, but I had the blessing to be able to tell what a bunch of other great men and women did to build a history to a state we now live in that I have to say, after a couple of years of pandemic and division in the country and all inflation and all these things that have happened, I don't think Oklahoma has ever looked better. I mean, I look at some of the other parts of this country that have become unhinged and people are just moving out by the thousands. And I look around, I live in Northwest Oklahoma, you're in Southwest Oklahoma, and the people I know, there's challenges, but I am much more appreciative now, Edie, even than I was a couple of years ago, to be living in Oklahoma with the values we have, the people we have, and really the perspective and worldview that we have.
Right. So you spoke of being the messenger, and I just want to say that I feel like you really took that role to heart and created something. I was trying to tell my husband, these 2 books are, they are a historic, it's a story that's in a coffee table book, but it's also a textbook.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a combination of all 3 of those things. The illustrations, the photographs that are in these books are, I mean, they just really pull everything together. And where you'll have at the end of a chapter, I just saw one. You'll have a picture and you'll have a special name. Let me find it. You call them, well, this one doesn't have it, but maybe it was in the second book. Anyway, it's like, it's usually a painting.
Yes.
Like this one.
Yes.
And it's just something significant, a significant location, a landscape or people.
Yeah, I think you are thinking. I think if you look in the second volume there, we have a little feature at the end of each chapter called "We Know We Belong to the Land."
Yeah, that's it. We know we belong to the land. Yeah, at the end of each one of these chapters, and it is. Yeah, you didn't call it that in the first ones, but the first book, but you do have the same idea. With the beautiful painting or photograph or whatever it is. It's just, they're just wonderful books. And around here at the Heritage Center, I kind of get sucked in and go down rabbit holes a lot. They are always having to pull me out. I'll be trying to study for one thing and I just get sucked in and chase something,
Well,
And
I have to bust you here on this for those that are watching. And I'm sure a lot of y'all know Edie, and I'm blessed to know her now too. But we met, a month or so ago when I was speaking at the Duncan Rotary Club, and I was proud to see that we had a whole table of class of 74. A bunch of my fellow classmates rallied and showed up for that. Butch Whitten was 1 year behind us in school, but he was augustly running the meeting. Well, after we finished that, y'all are right next door to him. And I thought, man, while I'm here in town, and again, I grew up in Duncan, graduated class of 74. And whenever I'm asked, wherever I go, whatever the situation, where are you from? I always say Duncan. And I mean, that's home. And I at least live now again in Western Oklahoma, but I'm 2 hours up Highway 81, the Chisholm Trail in Wacomas, between Hennessy and Enid. But I was leaving that day, the Simmons Center. I thought, oh, I got to drop in the Chisholm Trail Heritage Center, because y'all have been so robust about carrying our books for years. And I've spoken for y'all a few times in the past there. And I jumped in there, and I'm talking to Savannah and a couple of folks, and here comes this beautiful lady out of nowhere and grabs me and goes, we need to have you do an event. I go, hi, I'm John.
Yeah,
But,
well,
I know, but
I'm always on the lookout.
you sized it up and you thought, man, we've got an opportunity here. But really, I just want to let people know, Edie, I can tell you're one of those people that your heart is in what you do. It's a passion, and you grabbed me, and you were not about to let go before we set something up. And I know you have some other things you want me to do as well, but and I'm proud to do it. We had our launch, Edie, about a month ago at the Oklahoma History Center for this book, and it was a beautiful affair. In fact, we're going to be posting that video here in the next couple of days on our website, which is just my name, John, middle initial J, Dwyer, DWYER, johnjdwyer.com, and on our Facebook and all that stuff. But they had me get up and say a few words at the end of the program, and we had done so much preparation for that event and all the things that came together. We had some wonderful people, former Governor Frank Keating, Mark Green of Hobby Lobby, Mardell fame. Wanda Jackson was there. We gave her the first annual Oklahoma Gold Award, which is our radio program. Dr. Bob Blackburn. But I got up there, I realized I didn't know what I was going to even talk about. And so I said a quick prayer, Lord, I need some real help here. And what came to my mind, at least very early in that talk, it might have been the first thing, I talked about how I just was, this was a labor of love, and that I was giving back in a way I could never repay for what I got. And one of the things that came to me right then during that talk, Edie, was I realized, and I said this, I said, I didn't have a father. My dad was a World War II veteran, and he had a lot of stuff happen over there, and we lost him early. And so with Pacific, he was there 3 years on New Guinea. And so I said, it occurs to me that Duncan was my father, because I look back in that town as I was growing up, foolish, and any of my old friends that are watching this, will amen this, but foolish, sometimes reckless boy, angry, questions. But the people of Duncan in the town, as I look back now, I couldn't see it then. All I wanted to do was, I can't wait to leave, and go somewhere bigger, like the typical small town kid. But I look back now, I think, wow, people came around me. They encouraged me when I made stupid mistakes, whether it was, the guys at the newspaper that I worked at, my coaches, football and basketball coaches, a couple of judges. Thank you, George Lindley, wherever you are, and some others, a principal or two, Jack Atchley, people like that some might remember, that gave me a second chance, that didn't quit believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. And so I could never repay back what I was given by growing up in Duncan, where people helped me get up, do what I needed to do while I was there, and then helped give me a path. They got me a journalism scholarship at OU, nudged me out the door, didn't lose track of me, kind of kept encouraging me. So how do you ever pay that back? And if I'd have grown up in a million other places that wouldn't have had that support for a fatherless boy, you wouldn't be reading books written by John J. Dwyer now. So,
well, kudos to everyone who poured into your life. And I think we're all just very pleased to say you are a Duncanite, and that you want to acknowledge and give back. And we truly appreciate it. I have to ask you, so you left here and you went to school at OU, and did you get a bachelor's in journalism there?
Yes.
Did you also get a master's while you were there?
Yes, I actually got a bachelor's in journalism at OU. And I did postgraduate studies in history. I did journalism because, you know, God made me a good writer. People say, when did you start writing? Well, some guys start tinkering on the hood of a car. Those Facebook friends might know who Luke is, my 6-year-old grandson. That little kid can already fix stuff that I don't even know how to, whether it's upside down or not. Well, and he's got other talents too, but I'm just saying I've never had that talent, but I was writing stories when, as soon as I could get a pen in my hand and start making up stories. So that led ultimately to going to OU on a journalism scholarship. But as time passed and I took history courses at OU, I realized that's what my real love was history. Now, God used that love and the ability he gave me, the God-given ability, not something I was able to just do on my own, but he put in me to where I could write, and where I had this shirt here, some of y'all may see, oh, Dwyer. I didn't just realize I was wearing this little jacket deal, but my great grandfather, Edie, was Joseph J.O. Dwyer, and he came over on a boat. You can probably guess what country, Ireland. And of course, if there's anything that country's known for, well, there's two probably main things. One is drinking, which I did that in my earlier years and fortunately survived and quit doing that. But the other is storytelling. They call it Blarney and all these kind of things. But man, I'm a storyteller ultimately. And so I think what's happened is I love to write these novels such as Short Grass and Mustang about the Duncan boy, Lance Rourke during the Dust Bowl and World War II. But I think God had additional plans, which was to take the ability to write stories that make people care, make the reader care about the people you're writing about, and transfer that into a genre that can oftentimes be, if not boring, dry, where people, I'm talking historical nonfiction, history books, where people a lot of times are forced to read it. And so the subheadings on those books that you have there, the Oklahomans, the story of Oklahomans people. So it's stories about people. So yeah, I got that training. And then I went on, got my master's degree in theology at Dallas Theological Seminary, which there's been a tremendous heritage of Duncan people that have gone there, and some of the great pastors in Oklahoma City and other places, they're Duncan boys that went to DTS. And I think that was there were two things I got from that. One was just to build upon my understanding of God's work through people and nations in every generation, a providential view on history, which I'm not ashamed to say most historians in this day and time are far from that in their worldview, in their broadest macro understanding of what they're writing about. If they're not nihilistic, they certainly are not very optimistic. And I understand very clearly the sadness and sorrow and wrongs and injustice that so often permeate human history. But taking that a step further, if you believe, as the Bible suggests, that God has a plan to bring good from all of that and ultimately to be eternally good for those who follow him. Well, that was the other piece I got at Dallas Seminary. But along with that, something that wasn't on the catalog, Edie, that wasn't something I was going there to get or even knew I would get. I don't think I even realized for a long time that I did get it. And that was the ability to assimilate massive amounts of information. We're not talking just hundreds, we're talking thousands of pages of material. We'd be given an assignment, that's a very challenging school. And we might have 6 books that we were supposed to read to produce a 2-page essay in a week. So we might have to read a couple thousand pages with several other classes to take as well. Well, just out of sheer desperation and just adrenaline flow, I learned, as I look back now, to do that, to take huge amounts of information, to move through it, to pull out what I needed to stay on track with what my thesis was going to be and supporting arguments and all that, jettison everything else, pull it together, trim it, cut it, read it, cut it some more, cut it till it hurt, cut it till there's not much left, and then turn it in. Well, right. That's just what these books are. There are years and thousands of pages of material distilled down into a few hundred pages each.
So did you have a team of people helping you research and find all of the illustration components of the books?
That's a good question, Edie. Yes and no. I didn't have a team in the traditional sense of like we'd start a new chapter and I'd assign people, well, you go research this, you go do that. Part of that was maybe lack of resources. Part of it was my style of working. And that's been a tension that I've had to be able to, you know, being kind of obsessive compulsive, which you probably have to be to finish a book like this. I needed to be able to kind of, you know, pursue the kind of like a needle to the pole, you know, to stay on track with what I was doing. And by the way, people ask me, well, how do you organize books this size? Well, you kind of put a timeline together at the beginning. You figure out what you're, and we put decades into chapters, roughly speaking, not exactly that, but that allowed me to to organize each of these Oklahomans books into little mini books, to where on my computer I'd have a folder that would be chapter 1. I've got a folder, and then all the things that go in there, all the files for that chapter. One of those files would be the actual narrative itself as I worked on that. So I did that myself, but on the other hand, there was a huge number of people. When I'd have a story, I'd be working on well, I'll give you some examples that some of y'all know. Cova Williams, there at the Stevens County Heritage Center. I mean, the museum. Cova Williams, she and I have talked many hours through the past. It took 17 years to do these books, but Earl Halliburton, EP1, you know, who we have feature and pictures in volume Oklahomans 2. Jan Cole, former librarian at Duncan Library. Well, her husband, she told me one time, we're talking years ago now, okay, this is how long this took. Clay Cole, her husband's a great artist. Well, we commissioned him, and he painted an original painting of Earl Halliburton out there in the field, stirring cement with his men up on a bed of a truck. So, you know, you say, well, did other people help you on this? Yes. I guess I was kind of like the quarterback in each step of the way, where we're like, oh, we need a painting, or, oh, we need a photograph from, or E.R. Brigham Young, who was a great early Duncan police chief and sheriff. Okay. And folks are going to read about him in volume 2. I've never read about him in any book before, but partly because of Cova, I was able to find out about him, learn about him. Then she tracked down a photo of him, and she gave me links. So there's probably hundreds of people that in selective fashions helped in portions of the book. And what I did was I just tried to keep it moving forward. But then when we got toward the end, there were several people that were editors, and I'm talking history, veteran Oklahoma history teachers, history professors with doctorates in Oklahoma, several of them, one of them, Steve Bias, who is a Duncan boy like myself, was a year ahead of me. He clowned around in Mrs. O's, Ruth Oshowitz journalism class in high school with me as we produced the Demon Pitchfork newspaper and the Smoke Ring yearbook and that sort of stuff. Well, Steve Bias, all he does is head up the history department at Randall University and more, right there on I-35. It used to be Hillsdale Baptist College. So you better believe if Steve Bias is willing to read my book and each chapter by chapter give me feedback on that, then I'm going to take that help. So yeah, there were a lot of people that contributed.
Right. So it sounds like maybe not, I mean, I've never written a book or any kind of a volume like these are, but it seems like maybe a little of a non-traditional team. But a lot of people helping you. I mean, I just honestly going through this and these books and thinking about doing all of this, just one person seemed, just blew my mind. Over 17 years, even, you know, that's a very long time. But I guess the thing on your side is that it's historical. So it's not like you were losing a storyline or anything like that, you know, over that period of time.
Well, yes and no, because Wes Lane, some of y'all may recognize him. He was a former Oklahoma County District Attorney. He was the guy that prosecuted Terry Nichols, Oklahoma City bomber. If you remember, and we talk about this, by the way, in volume 2, just in depth. you know, the feds went after Terry Nichols just for their few people that were killed, and they ignored all the Oklahomans, as is typical of the feds ignoring Oklahoma. That's not an unfamiliar refrain. So there are a lot of people that came to Wes and said, you know, my son, my daughter, no one has ever stood trial for murdering them. And when we're talking sons and daughters, as you know, in the Oklahoma City bombing, some of those were months old babies. And so Wes Lane was probably my best friend outside of family and all, and my grandson Luke. He and I go back to college days, and he helped hold me accountable along the way to make sure I stayed on track. And at one point, Edie, I would actually, by the way, I advise my fellow writers of this. You know, I've written a lot of books, but I still do this. When I'm writing a book, I have to have somebody hold me accountable for how many hours a week I work on the book that I'm on that at that point. And, you know, typically I'll figure out what that number of hours needs to be, but then they will hold me to account for that. Well, Wes was doing that. And at one point, and I think this was back during volume 1, I was struggling, and I had to, you know, every Monday morning at 8, turn in my time for the previous week. And this one week it was pitiful, you know, and he called me, he goes, man, at this rate, we're going to have 3 volumes by the time you get finished. There's going to be so much history passed by before you get finished with writing these books. So yeah, the timeline does not actually stop just because you're taking a long time to write it.
Right. I loved, there were little parts about each of these volumes that I really liked. And I mean, I skimmed. I mean, I wanted to go like, I did read every single word about the Tulsa race massacre, the Greenwood thing. I read every word on that story. I just could not stop. I had to read all of that. I did, but anyway, where you have the little boxes, and it will be, you'll have the governor of, you know, during that time period, and just a little bit of information. And one of the trail talks that we do around here, we do Oklahoma governors, and we usually do like, you know, 5 at a time and talk about them. And so I really loved seeing that. I thought that that was just a cool, you know, it just meant something to me. But the point is, every single person, I think, who goes through these books, there will be something like that. You know, something that they will be very drawn to, or some part of Oklahoma's history that is more meaningful to them than another part, or maybe it's just an interest that they have. And so it's just really, it's so great. The Green Corn Rebellion, we talked about that on a trail talk one time, and I had forgotten about all of the socialism movement and all of those things, the Ku Klux Klan, and I mean, just all, and that's not even the messiest of the history part of Oklahoma, you know. I mean, but that's one thing I appreciate too, is the early years, the dealings with the Native Americans and all of that. I feel like you are very thorough with every part of all of those things that happened, and they were not those are not things that people that I think we can have a lot of pride in. The end result is where we are today, you know, it's all part of our state's history. But I do think it's so important for people to read the information like you have it in here, because I think it's important to see all of it. And then the second one, with all of the, like you say, you know, more current events. The first one goes through statehood, so that's going to be 1907. I did notice you kind of went a little bit past statehood. In this one, you kind of you went back a little bit. Together, but you know, our relatives, you know, we're gonna know someone who was in World War II. We're gonna have a relative who was in World War I. We're gonna know people who lived through the Dust Bowl. You know, we have heard personal stories from people about all of those things. And I think that that's part of what makes the second volume so amazing. Plus, it's the growth of our state. how the cities came together and grew up and just all of that. It's just, it's just a really beautiful story. And that's why I think these books are so great, because of the way you've combined the textbook information with the story of our state. It's just the result is just a plus. Like I said, they make great coffee table books. People are
Well,
beautiful to look at.
Edie, you can't imagine how encouraging what you just said is, because we contemplated for years when I was writing the first book, which, that started in 2005 and that book came out in 16. We were laboring to decide, is this a coffee table book? Is this a textbook? Is this a history book like a person would pick up at a Barnes and Noble or something to read just for, general interest and all? And
yes.
Well, yeah, exactly. And we finally, at a certain point, we decided, this book needs to be what it's going to be. And that's part of what, and I would encourage my fellow writers, whether it's your characters in your books or your story, keep a loose enough grip where you do not choke the life out of your characters in your story. You let your story tell you what it is. And I think that's part of what happened on this, Edie, was to not try to force feed this deal. And see, that's what happens with the typical textbook. New York publishing house, they crunch, they grind the life out of these things because they have to fit through certain grids and all, certain timetables, certain checkoff lists. And by the end of it, they have squeezed the life out of it. And if you think, well, what do you mean by that? Well, what I mean is they're boring and people don't read them unless they have to. And they might win awards and the people might have alphabet soup titles and all. But what I think happened here was, by the grace of God, we allowed these books to be the story that I would hope, and I think he wanted written to tell our story, the story of a distinct place and people. And I think that's another thing. A lot of folks that write history books, they're not proud of where they're from. They're not proud of where they're at. They're not proud of perhaps the university they're teaching at or the people that are paying their salary. And so they might mute that displeasure, but it comes out without passion. It certainly doesn't inspire young people. Well, when you read our books, you mentioned some very difficult eras and errors in our state's history. And Governor Frank Keating, he told me that one of the reasons he decided to write the foreword to Volume 1 was after he read the book. He said, this book, I realized you told the real story. You did not sugarcoat the problems and the wrongs, but yet it was clear you loved Oklahoma. You were proud of the state and that we should be proud of it. And you proceeded to tell why. And so I think but again, that is my job. That was my job. I was the only person that could do that. I got help from people. I got coached. I got mentored. I had scholars that gave me input, most of which I took, but not always their suggestions. But at the end of the day, I was the only one in this case that would be able to keep it on track. It was my responsibility is what I'm saying, so that you could look there and go, wow, this is a coherent story from start to finish. I know who the characters and the themes are. There's worse stuff in here than I've ever read in an Oklahoma history book.
Right.
But there's also greater stuff, and I'm more inspired than I've ever been by an Oklahoma history book. That was my goal.
Well, I'm looking at the size of these two volumes, right? I mean, let's put them side by side here. The typical Oklahoma history book is probably about like that right there.
Yeah.
Because there's one semester of class time allowed to teach. Yeah. And so there's so much that we miss out on. We're not ever exposed to it. And unless someone is interested and really wants to take the time and put in the effort, you don't get the whole story. And even the high spots that are covered are the objectives.
Yeah. It's And
I
I
mean,
feel for the teachers because I'm a teacher myself. You know, I've taught 30 years. I taught at Southern Nazarene University for 16 years. And until just the load on these books and everything that came with it to do it right. Plus, I live 100 miles now from Oklahoma City, so I've stepped away from that for a period of time. But Oklahoma history teachers are in a tough spot because typically they work with what they're given and they can come up with some other resources and all, but they're expected in a lot of cases to teach to a test or to have a certain number of facts and figures. And I can remember when I was in school, I was a long time ago in Oklahoma. I remember learning the names of the tribes, the state bird and flower and stuff, and regurgitating that on a test. What's that?
memorizing the counties.
Yeah, the counties.
Yeah, yeah.
So, how do you do it in a way? And I'll tell you, if you want though people to do more than that, I'm not just talking about classroom here, but if you want people to read these books, the only hope, I believe, Edie, for people to really come away from these books with a positive experience where I feel like I succeed as an author and they walk away going, wow, I'm glad I have that book, is to put it in the form that is so compelling that they are compelled to own the material, to go in there to where they're not memorizing it for a 10-point test, but they get their heart and mind around it and they own it, and then it's going to stick with them. So
you internalize all of that and you hold it dear because it's part of who you are.
Yes.
And I mean, that's really, to me, the whole thing about these volumes is just your heart and soul is poured into this. But I mean, it's truly something for every Oklahoman I would encourage people to buy these books and have them in your home and use them as a way to enhance the education that your children have or you have, and pass all that on and share it, because these are important books, I think.
Well, I appreciate that. And I want to make sure we mention one thing. I think you and I talked about this a little bit before for the program, but QR codes. I think we know what those are.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, if you want, you can show them there. You can probably show them better than I can tell them. There's over 200 of them in volume 2, and the new edition coming out, volume 1, has about 100 of them.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So that new edition will be here in about a month, and we've gone back. Yeah, and like Edie's pointing, those are elections from, I can't see what year, but whatever year. We have a couple of election results there from big electoral races. And yeah, 1950. Well, you flash your electronic device, your iPhone or whatever, over that, and it takes you on the screen of your phone right to, or iPad, right to our website, and an enlarged version of that. In that case, Edie, it gives a whole roster of election results, governor, senator, state, representative. I mean, the congressional districts, the big lieutenant governor, things like that. On the sidebars, it might have, for instance, Earl Halliburton. We talked about him before. Well, you'll have a little blurb in the book about him. You flash your device over that, it takes you to our website, a much more expanded version. We have over 500 additional pages of material on our johnjdwyer.com website, and 50 podcasts are spread through there. Pretty Boy Floyd, there's another guy. You think, oh wow, was he really from Oklahoma?
Outlaws and everything, man.
Yeah. And talk about exciting reading though. And Charles Pretty Boy Floyd was a compelling character. He wasn't your typical, criminal. And so you see a couple of hundred words in the book, but then you go to the website. I've got a 4,000 word essay on there with many pictures, a 2-part podcast. And of course, those podcasts, you can go to Oklahoma Gold page on our website. Those are broadcast every Sunday night on KTOK radio. I think people can get it in Duncan 1000 AM, and then we convert them to podcasts. So yeah, those QR codes, and it's free. You don't have to pay anything, but what you get with the book, we're not really promoting that out there on the internet. So it's basically kind of a treasure for the people that get the book and read it. They can go find that material.
Right, I mean, you can chase down a rabbit hole as deep as you want to go.
You're in hog heaven, Edie. It's made for people like Edie.
That is exactly right. So while you were writing these, I mean, honestly, John, I could talk about these two books forever, I think, but you have other books that you have written. And so were you writing these historical fiction novels? You had to have been at the same time you were working on these Oklahomans volumes.
Yeah, and that wasn't always a popular topic around my house or around the board of our company but I had this storyteller's compulsion, Shortgrass and Mustang there, and I know a lot of people from Duncan have read those books, but it's a fictional character, Lance Roark. That's a boy on the horse there, and a lot of y'all know who Pearl Carter Scott is from Marlowe. She was the famous young aviatrix, female aviator, and that's a character we renamed in the books and all because we took a little bit of dramatic license, but the essence of that's Pearl, and that's her.
Right?
What's that?
Her name's Sadie Stanton.
Yeah, Sadie Stanton.
Yeah.
And she's flying that Curtis Robin that her daddy bought her, and Wiley Post, who taught her how to fly, recommended that he get.
Yeah.
And so Lance is a Duncan boy. Shortgrass is during the Dust Bowl. It includes the last football game ever played between Duncan and Marlowe, which ended not when the benches cleared, but with the stands cleared, and the two towns fought each other. And DB Green, my buddy from Marlowe, the banker there for a long time, I think he still has Bank First up there, he told me that story, and he said the two towns emptied out the stands and brawled, and they said we could never play again. Well, then he told me a few years ago they had a wrestling match between Duncan and Marlowe after all these years, and a big brawl ensued there too. So they decided, let's just be friendly neighbors and scrimmage, but don't play games. But yeah.
John, this is a true story. One of my sons played Little League football.
Yeah.
We played Marlowe, and the same thing happened. Literally, they had all the fans sitting on the same side instead of across the field from each other, and it got crazy. We had police at a Little League game, so the tension is still there.
Yeah, it's and part of Edie at the beginning, those who read Shortgrass know this. I kind of make some literary flourishes there about how we call it the Shortgrass country. Those that grew up there, you don't even realize what you're born into. You don't realize till you get about my age, you look back, that you're born into a place, a heritage, a legacy. It's not all good. It's mostly good, but there is a certain cultural ethos, folkways, they call them, traditions, that if you stay around a place like Duncan long enough, and I know this because as I've gone abroad and gone a lot of places, I remember one time I was downtown Oklahoma City at a meeting with some pretty fancy people, and this one guy was in from out of town. I think it was Samsung or somebody, and he looked at me, he goes, "Man, you're wearing a hat and boots." And one of the guys that knew me, he said, "He's from Duncan, Oklahoma." And that was all the guy said. I thought that was interesting because none of them were from Duncan, but that was how he saw me, was the way I was, not just dressing, but that I was from a particular place. And, that was how I grew up to be, was how that town that fathered me, that and a lot of other things taught me to be.
Right.
And Lance, the boy in Shortgrass, and then he winds up, Shortgrass goes up through the first year of the war, World War II, Pearl Harbor, and then Mustang is, that is a book. When that book came out a couple of years ago, it was the #1 rated fiction book in the state in the Daily Oklahoman rankings when that came out. And that's because that is, you're in the cockpit from this boy you've learned to love in Shortgrass, this goofy kid from the country, Dust Bowl and all. And then his life is on the line as he's in the cockpit fighting against the most powerful enemies that our country had ever had to that point. So,
right. And I love, he's where he's based. He has his in Suffolk County, England. And he has friends from OU who played football,
That's right.
are part of his friend group there, well, and his buddies too.
And one of those guys, his main buddy there, well, one of them is from Chickasha, and I used the name of a guy that was just the tough as nails football and basketball player, Chickasha Fighting Chicks, when we were in high school. And I really admired him. He never said a word, but he was tough. So I named this character Bob Patton. I hadn't seen him in 40 years. And we got a hold of him. He came to the book release of Mustang up in Oklahoma City, and it was so cool, and he couldn't believe, he couldn't believe a character was named after him, a very admirable character in the book that was a fictional character. But then Waddy Young, Lance's best friend, was a real person. He was actually, and he's featured in the new book, Edie, Volume 2. We have a 40-page chapter on Oklahoma and World War II. Never seen that in an Oklahoma history book before, because what we do is we tell not just facts and figures about what happens around here in the state. It's the story about people. We talk about what Oklahomans did, and during the 1940s, they were accomplishing great deeds all over the world. And so Waddy Young was one of those. He was the first consensus All-American football player ever at OU, and that's saying something. He was to put it mildly, a World War II hero, flying a B-29 against the Japanese and a B-24 against the Germans. So I kind of put him in there in his real character. He was really the way he was. I researched him greatly, but he was Lance Rourke's best friend in Shortgrass and Mustang.
Mm-hmm. I am sure these are really fun books to read. And I mean, I think they'd probably be a pretty fast read.
Yeah, and you can also, they are fast reading. You can also, they're on Audible and, Kindle and all that. So you can get them.
My favorite.
Okay, well, jump on there, because the guy that's the reader for those books, he is hilarious. I mean, I've never seen a guy in any book, even the big, huge New York publishers. This guy so got into it that there were some OU songs and stuff, the school fight song and some fraternity songs and all that are in Shortgrass in particular. Well, this guy, the reader on Audible, he went and found out the tunes to those. So in the narrative, when they're singing a song, he actually sings the OU song or whatever it is, the fraternity song.
That is awesome. Wow. That's fun. That's one of the things I love about Audible, are all the little extra things like
yes.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's fun. So you've written 9 books in all. Now you've written let's see, is one Stonewall? Is that about Stonewall Jackson?
Yes, man. That was my first book, Stonewall. It was the Civil War era, although it really was his whole life. But it was a historical novel, but I really, researched, of course, very carefully. And then the sequel to that was Robert E. Lee, which picked up right before Gettysburg, picked up the midpoint of the war between the states and moved forward. And so there were those two. The only book I've written that's not historical is a little novel called When the Bluebonnets Come. When that book came out, my wife said, "Whoa, you finally wrote a short book. Woohoo," So, but there's also an ebook.
It's the story.
Yeah, that's a story about a former OU football player from Oklahoma who's pastoring a little church down in the Bluebonnet country of Texas. So it's kind of half on both sides of the Red River, and it's just kind of a folksy tale. It runs less than 200 pages. So that's on Audible also. It's got a great reader, a different reader. It's told from the perspective, and this, I guess, just, I'm a writer, and I don't know how it baffles me that I would do this, but it was written from the perspective of a woman looking back on her childhood as a little girl in the country when all these things were happening with her daddy and other people. And the lady that reads that's an Oklahoman, Laura Bernhardt, and she is tremendous. She's an award-winning novelist herself, but that's something I'd recommend. When the Bluebonnets Come, you can get it on Audible. And then I have an ebook called Riding the Shortgrass Country. And that was actually the prologue to Shortgrass, that novel. But my literary agent, one of her ceaseless tasks was to get me to cut, trim, edit. And so she would always say, and this is good writer's advice, especially when you're writing a novel, always start it as late as possible. In other words, if you're telling a 100-year story, well, how late can you start the book where you jump your reader in and you maybe weave what happened the previous 80 years, you weave that into the story. But in that vein, the prologue to Shortgrass, which was Lance Roark, the hero of Shortgrass and Mustang, the Duncan boy, it was his great grandfather who came over on a boat from Ireland, like my great grandfather did, wound up riding with Stan Wadey in the Cherokee Mounted Rifles for the Confederacy in the Civil War and in Oklahoma because they came west. And then winding up where the ebook takes place is right outside of Duncan. It's on the Chisholm Trail. And so that was how Lance Roark's kinfolks came to settle in the land in Duncan back in the 1800s. But that's about a 40-page ebook. But I forget about that a lot. But people, when they read that, they love it. It's a Western. They run into the Comanches on the Chisholm Trail. They're trying to drive cattle north, and it sets up Shortgrass.
That sounds very much like a story by someone named Dennis Johnson. No, is that right?
I've heard that name, but I can't place.
Sure. It's called The Indian's Last Stand or The Dull Knife Raid.
Yeah. Well,
And-
Dull Knife Raid, we talk about that in volume 1 of the Oklahomans. But
So the author of that book is related to my husband, and he's been doing some research, and it talks about the Chisholm Trail, the cattle drives, and he just tells a lot of it's firsthand, observations that he had. It was written, I think about 1915 was when it was written. But the Dull Knife Raid, gave my husband this last night. I said, read about the Dull Knife Raid. It's right here in this book. So I thought that was
good job, Edie.
Yeah. Hey, but that's another cool thing about these books. All of these stories are that you've written, but even other books written about, I think you even made reference to the Empire of the Summer.
Yeah. Empire of the Summer Moon.
Moon. Yeah, Empire of the Summer Moon. You made reference to that. That's a book that I listened to on Audible.
Yes.
Because if you read stories like that or Audible, listen to them or whatever, all of those stories, the real history behind them are in these volumes. Oklahoma,
well, you're right.
Part of all of that.
In fact, Edie, there's 2 books with similar names, but I'm sure you're familiar with both. One is Empire of the Summer Moon, and the other is Killers of the Flower Moon, which was the Osage murders. Well, both those books I read at times when I'd already written. In the first case, Empire of the Summer Moon is when I was writing volume 1, and I'd already written that portion of the book when I read what the book Empire of the Summer Moon concerned. And then when I was writing volume 2, I read Killers of the Flower Moon, and I'd already written the Osage murder part, but I went back and did surgery and expanded both of those chapters in those respective books. For instance, on Empire of the Summer Moon, there was, that was a Pulitzer Prize winning finalist, and the great story of the Comanches fighting the U.S. Army right here, right where we live in our part of the country. And of course, one of the main characters, if not the main character in the book, is Chief Quanah Parker. Well, this is why it's a labor of love. One of my junior high football and basketball coaches was Coach Quanah Cox, great grandson of Quanah Parker. Yeah. Beth Cox, who was a classmate of mine all through schools, great granddaughter of Quanah Parker, and Catherine Cox Rogers, a couple of years older than us, but they had me actually speak a couple of years ago in Duncan at the Quanah Parker family reunion, and that was incredible. But point being that we grow up in Duncan and we don't realize the history and the great men and women that are all around us, such as in this case, Quanah Parker. And you see Wild Horse Creek, running around Marlow and all. I never knew that was a famous Comanche war chief. And in fact, in Shortgrass, those that read that, the first chapter, when Duncan and Marlow are having that game, ball goes into Wild Horse Creek and they're next to the field and they're fighting for the ball. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. Great ways to just include actual landmarks and historical events and everything into a story.
Yes.
That makes historical fiction can be really great for that kind of, as long as you don't use it as a reference,
Yeah. Well,
something.
John Dwyer said in his novel that this happened, and
Right, yeah. Yeah, use John Dwyer's novel footnote. That might not
yeah.
work, but you might
Well,
be able to use one of these volumes of the Oklahomans. That one might work.
well, on that note though, Edie, those QR codes, we've got a corrections and updates page, okay? Because in the introduction to volume 1 of the Oklahomans, I say that one thing I know about this book is there's mistakes. And people go, what? You're talking about mistakes in your own book? But then I say, yeah, if we knew what they were, we'd have corrected them already. And we corrected millions of them. But these type of books, I mean, maybe someone else can, but I can't write a book that's a couple 100,000 words, 800 words, 800 images on a million different topics. Almost every line kind of opens up a new story. And to do that, I can't do that without making some mistakes. For instance, we have a photo in there with several guys' names. It's a cut line. And I knew who all the guys in the photo were. I actually had it painted. I knew who they all were. And somehow the names come out in the wrong order on the cut line. How does that happen? Well, but now with QR codes, we say, go here and look and find corrections. And when we get that really set up, we're going to allow readers to put corrections on there. So, hey, would you check on page 220? Yeah.
You're like your own little Wikipedia page.
Exactly. So we'll have to be as careful as they are too, but
right, that's true. That's true. Well, I mean, I love that whole QR thing that you've included on that. I think that's just, it's like, I don't know, it's like a service that goes along with the book or something, So do you have any other books? Like,
let's see. Well, The War Between the States, America's Uncivil War. Now that is, that's a 700-page Civil War history book, textbook. It's used as both. It's, in fact, that book is responsible for the Oklahomans books, Edie, because in 2005, when I went into Dr. Blackburn's office at the Historical Society, I was living in Texas at the time. I'd gone down there for seminary and was still living there. And he had The War Between the States on his desk. And whenever I was in town, I'd go by and visit him. And he was wanting me to do a novel on Stan Wadey, historical novel for the centennial celebration. And the publisher, he wanted to be the third part of a trilogy, Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee that were written, and then Stan Wadey. Well, my agent and I, we wanted to do that, but the publisher, of course, not enough people know that he's from Oklahoma, blah, blah, blah. So they wouldn't let us do it. But it led to something much bigger, because I walked in and those discussions started in 2001. Well, in 2005, I go into Dr. Bob's office and he's got The War Between the States, America's Uncivil War on his desk. And the rest of his desk is totally clean. That's the only thing on his desk. And he looks at me and he goes, "Can you write a book like this about Oklahoma?" And I'm like, whoa, what? Because I didn't know whether to hug him or slap him, because War Between the States took 5.5 years to write, and that was an undertaking. Well, but what he wanted was a book that was a huge subject, but was made digestible by the average reader, because it was stories about people with lots of color, pictures, passion, thrills, heartbreaks. It wasn't written antiseptically or like a clinical deal. It was written as a grand kind of an epic poem, but yet was buttressed with authenticity and accuracy. Didn't run off in flights of fancy. Well, so that's another book, War Between the States, America's Uncivil War. Now, that's now in its 5th edition. And several years ago, we came out with a study guide, because not just homeschoolers, but a lot of their schools, I don't even know how many states, but in the last year, we've gotten orders from Missouri, from Virginia, from Oklahoma and Ohio for people that use this, homeschoolers and schools. They use it, the homeschoolers use it as a unit study. The others will use it as an American history semester. But that story is for anybody that wants to know all the many reasons, there wasn't just one, there were many that led to that war, what happened during the war, and the people, not just the generals, but the spies, the nurses, the photographers. We have over 100 biographical features in that book. And that was before we had QR codes, Edie. So the whole feature's in that book, not just a portion. But then also what happened after the war, what were the consequences? And I'll just say, I mean, I think it's as accurate a treatment as I was humanly capable of making it. It's politically incorrect in places. It flies against the modern narrative in certain places, not in lots of places, but in some places, because I am ceaselessly looking for the truth. And I can't stand to write something that's just, catering to the current trends and all. And so that might cost us an award here, a reader there. But by gosh, when your son or my daughter reads that book, I know that they're getting the truth. And that's what I believe I'm put here to do, is to tell the stories of our nation and our state's history in a truthful fashion.
Have you read How the South Won the Civil War?
Who's the author?
No, not off the top of my head.
Yeah.
On Audible, I listened to it.
Well, the reason I ask is there's quite a few books that have similar names, and I wanted to make sure. I've read books with names like that, but I'm not sure if I've read that actual one.
It was more based on like all the things that happened post-Civil War.
Yes, yes.
That are just, again, it's just it's like a time in history that we jump from the Civil War to the next.
Yeah.
And all of those things that happened, the Reconstruction is just called Reconstruction, and it's kind of defined as what that really meant, but it's not. Heather Cox Richardson.
Yeah, I don't think I've
Okay,
read
well,
that
it was an interesting read, but I feel like it was kind of some of what I think you're talking about, where you dig deep and you find out about a lot of things that are you're just thinking.
Well, yeah, because what tends to happen is stories get condensed, and especially in this day and time, it's soundbite stuff, and people come up with simple answers to very complex questions. And then our kids get misled, because then it gets jammed into here's a little package we're going to deliver down and memorize this for the test and go on. And I'm sorry, some subjects, it doesn't mean we should make them dull or boring, but it does mean we might not be able to make them real simple and real quick. But to me, that's you're talking about, you like to explore and go down the rabbit trails and all. That event, the war between the states, the Civil War, has a lot of names. That was as big of an event in this nation's history as the original War of Independence was, and in so many different ways. And so, and one of the ways, by the way,
the impact it had on politics.
yes.
I mean, it is. I don't know. It's just something I'd never been exposed to, that information, or even considered it. And
in our book, we talk about, we bring in a subject that people from our own state weren't aware of, how Oklahoma was involved, Indian Territory back then. There were battles here. The only Native American general in the Civil War was an Oklahoman, Stan Wadey. The battles that took place, Will Rogers' father, Clem Rogers, was one of Stan Wadey's cavalry scouts. And so we dig into that in that book. And then in Oklahomans Volume 1, we have an entire chapter, 31 pages, on the war between the states in Oklahoma. We have maps of the campaigns, the generals, what happened. And that's just, for myself, I was learning that as I was researching and writing it. So that's a treat in Volume 1 that Oklahomans, most of us didn't know that all that happened here. We think it just happened in Gettysburg or, Shiloh or somewhere.
It's just, seriously, viewers, we could talk about these 2 volumes for hours. I think there's so much in them. And I'm sure, like you said, you were learning those things as you were researching and studying. Just what a great way to spend those hours of your day.
Yeah.
you know, really, and then being able to put it into the form that you put it into, just to give like the whole big picture.
Yeah.
That I think really can people from different worldviews, people with different backgrounds can see their side or the way they've always thought of it, as well as another side that they were never been exposed to.
Yeah.
And I really think that that's another thing I noticed about these books, is that it really allows people to see like a 360-degree
Yeah.
picture of our state's history.
You know, that's a great point, because volume 1, I'm more used to talking about because it's been out longer. I'm sure there's example in volume 2 of the Oklahomas, but volume 1, there's some people in that book, some of our great heroes of Oklahoma history, that in some cases not only didn't like each other, but were actively opposed to one another. For instance, I mentioned Stan Wadey a couple times, John Ross, the great principal chief of the Cherokees. Those guys were at loggerheads for decades. They had differing visions for their tribe, for America. And yet I dare to say in that book that both of them are giants of Oklahoma history. Kate Barnard, who's probably my favorite hero from Oklahoma history, as I have said in many places, actively opposed by and to Alfalfa Bill Murray, founding father of Oklahoma, the first governor, Charles Haskell, Charles Colcord, one of the great Western lawmen, U.S. Marshals, Chisholm Trail. From the age of 12 years old, he was driving cattle up the Chisholm Trail. He's actually in that ebook, Riding the Shortgrass Country. But Kate Barnard and all those guys were great contributors, and I would say heroes of Oklahoma history. And so what I do is I kind of try to put it out there and show where they were coming from and their perspectives. Yeah, sometimes I'll lean one way or another, but I always try to at least give the side of the person, even if I'm not totally agreeing with their view of what they did, why they did it, what they believed. And then you, the reader, you can get fired up about that person that might not be my favorite, and then you have enough to go on to go research them some more. And they might wind up being somebody you teach your kids about as a hero in your family.
Right, exactly. Well, John, I just cannot say how much I appreciate you being our guest on Trail Talk today. And I hope, viewers, that you guys are as interested in these books as I've kind of, fawned over them. But I can't help myself. They are great historical volumes for your family, for your home, and then great reading. These are the kind of stories that, I mean, like I said, they're pretty quick, but I would see teenagers enjoying these books.
Absolutely. And I made a point to keep Shortgrass and Mustang, even though there's some challenging themes and scenes, warfare, but we kept bad language, and we got pressure from publisher and so forth to keep in some stuff, and I wanted young people to be able to read those and learn the good and bad lessons, but not have to be poisoned with horrible stuff that's in so many of the historical novels and stuff now. So yeah, we've tried to write those to where even if it's a younger child that a dad or grandma or somebody wants to read to the family, you can read it, and I don't think there's going to be anything in there that you're going to just go, oh, I can't believe I read that. It'll be something that is acceptable, even if it's challenging. And by the way, anybody that likes this sort of stuff and is interested, if you go to our website, johnjdwyer.com, you can sign up. There's an email sign up list. It's free to subscribe to our Oklahoma history service, where we send out podcasts and articles that I do that are new each month. It's private. We don't share it with anyone. It's free. And then that gets us engaged, kind of like Edie and I are, where we can correspond. You can reach me. You can email me through that. That's a way to keep it going, and to just on a piecemeal basis moving forward, learn more. And if you get an article and you're not interested in it, you don't have to read it, but it might be something that you're real interested in, and you can email me and ask for more sources for it and where to go to get more information.
Right. And these are both Will Rogers Medallion Award-winning books. And johnjdwyer.com is the website. We're going to put that in the comments on here. Anyway, John, so you're traveling, you're doing book signings and all of those kinds of things these days, right?
That's right. And any of the folks that are out and about this Saturday, if you're in Northwest Oklahoma, up where I live, the Painted Buffalo Trading Company, it's an Oklahoma and American-made gift store in Wacomas, just south of Eno. Or you can drive from Duncan. It's 2 hours straight up Highway 81. If you want to make a morning trip, come eat at Moe's place. It's a great Oklahoma diner. This was all opened up during the pandemic and they've made it stick. Well, you can eat at Moe's, and then from 10:30 to 12, we've got a book signing. All my books will be there in Wacomas, right there on Highway 81, Painted Buffalo Trading Company. And then Saturday afternoon, 3 to 5, Full Circle Bookstore in Oklahoma City in the 50 Penn Place building. I'll be there from 3 to 5. If anybody's in the Tulsa area, Northeast Oklahoma Green Country, a week from this Saturday, the 18th, from 1 to 4 p.m., I'll be doing a book signing at the Barnes & Noble Woodland Plaza. There's 2 Barnes & Nobles in Tulsa, but it's the Woodland Plaza one on 71st. So we'll be in Northwest Oklahoma, Central Oklahoma, Northeast Oklahoma in the next week or two. That events calendar is on our johnjdwyer.com website. And I'll be back in Duncan. I mentioned Jan Cole earlier and Cova at the Stevens County Heritage Museum. They've invited me to return for their big annual banquet and so forth. I think it's September 29th. So I'll be live down there in Duncan again in September. Some of y'all were probably at that 2 or 3, maybe 4 years ago now. I spoke, and I'll be delivering a talk on what we've been talking about here today, the modern history of Oklahoma, and it'll have a special focus on heroes from Duncan. And we haven't even hardly gotten into that. We mentioned Mr. Halliburton, but there's a whole bunch of Duncan heroes that are in volume 2 of the Oklahomans that you'll read about. And then I'll be talking about those people on, I think it's September 29th. It's the end of September. You can contact Cova or Jan Cole or others at the, having to do with the Stevens County Heritage Society, I think, in the museum, and they can tell you about it.
County's Historical Society.
Historical, yeah.
Well, John, thank you so much for being here. Before we get off, I want to promote one little thing. Have you ever heard of Let's Talk About It?
I'm not sure I have.
So Let's Talk About It is sponsored by the Oklahoma Humanities. It's a project, Oklahoma Humanities and National Endowment for the Humanities, McCaslin Foundation, Oklahoma City University. And we get to be a host location for one of these events. And so it's a book club kind of thing of sorts. And we are, the very first one is on July the 11th, and we're talking about cowboy life, reconstructing an American myth. This is the first book, and we're going to read it. And then we have a scholar named Caroline Larson who is coming. Do you know her? Do you know Miss Larson?
I don't.
Well,
sounds like I need to.
Yeah, I know, right? She's going to be coming and doing a presentation, and then we'll discuss the book together. And I just think it's going to be a super fun event, and we'll do one of those a month, July through November. And like I said, the first one is July the 11th. And so we'll have a different book, Lonesome Dove, The Virginian. I mean, there are some great books that we're going to be reading. So anyway, I think that's kind of a fun thing. It sounds like your calendar is pretty packed, but it sure would be fun if you could come down for one of those.
Well, hey, you got me on this one, so
I did, didn't I? Yeah. Who knows?
You're a go-getter.
I have my ways. Well, again, John, thank you so much. You guys go to his website, get in this. We have these books available here at the gift shop at the Heritage Center. So come by and check them out. See if you want to buy one and take it home with you. You will not regret it, I guarantee you. So when we sign off, John, we always say happy trails. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, thank you again. Happy trails.
Happy trails, Roy and Dale and Edie.
Thank you. We're still alive. We're trying to get signed off.
Okay, do I have permission to leave? Am I dismissed?
Bye, John. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You guys be sure and come by and check out these books. Okay.
I think we're good. I think we're not live. Okay, hang on. What's this doing? They just gave me emotions. There's nothing to stop it.
How do you know it all?
Looking here, make sure we're not still going. We just went through that video.
Can you just
No,
mute?
you-
Oh, yeah, we didn't.